Well, it's been a little while since I've done a video on my recent book haul or book take, and so that, needless to say, it's built up over some time. Won't go through all the books I've received and bought over the last few months, but I'll kind of highlight a handful that have really stood out to me as some great additions to my library. Some are commentaries, some are systematics. A lot of them are general reading, and then there are some that are ministerial in nature, and you'll find, I think, a lot of these different use for public and private ministry, and also personal edification as well. So let's just jump right into it. I'll simply tell you that one of my favorite authors is the last few years has been J.C. Ryle, and I can see why he was so incredibly popular. I can see why his books have been reprinted over and over. He's kind of, J.I. Packer for his own time. Anglican, highly evangelical, focused on being an evangelical in the broad church, and of course an Anglican kind of in the more narrow sense of the work of the church in England. He lived from, I think it was 1816 to 1900, so again, a kind of a modern period pastor. And I've got a number of his works, of course, Holiness being his most popular. My favorite, really, of his books is his collection of writings called Practical Religion, which is just absolutely fantastic. Then he's got great little booklets. One's called Simple Preaching. I think Banner does that. It's like a little 30-page handout on how to keep things practical, but also preach truth without getting overly simplified. Makes a distinction between simple and simplistic preaching. He's a fantastic author, and I've read a lot of his. Just I've got a collection of Christmas oratories and tracts that Banner published last Christmas. That was fantastic. I mean, just he's really, really good. So Banner had a sale at the PCA's General Assembly, and the books were about $10 cheaper than they normally are. And I finally kind of just bit the bullet and got them. So got this first one is charges and addresses. You might be aware of these. These are, of course, all the charges and addresses he gives typically to the Anglican Church or to a seminary or to a group of men. And it's kind of fun that they're grouped together. Kind of charges are very unique. They're very exhortational in quality. And I haven't dug into this one yet, but they look there's a handful that look very exceptionally helpful. You might have seen Sinclair Ferguson's recommendation of this one recently, I believe. It's called J.C. Ryle's Christian Leaders of the 18th Century. And this is really a rich book in that it kind of gives you, highlights for you some of these very important evangelical figures in this time. It also gives you some writings about kind of what was going on during that time toward the very beginning. And again, I think a lot of times we get worn out and not burnt out, but kind of burned up a little bit. And it's always nice to kind of get the ministry's perspective from somebody else who's done it for a long time, and to kind of get our sights kind of refocused again on the gospel, on Christ, on what we're doing in ministry, making disciples. And it's nice to have heroes of the faith, and I think this book fits that need. I've already started Knots United, and this is the book I was looking forward to buying the most that I hadn't had the money for. But Knots United and or sorry, United Knots Untied. I'm sorry. And what's great about this one is that it goes into in his period kind of issues of the day that were controversial or challenging. Maybe not controversial for us. Some of these things might be a little bit more simply stated, but actually in the church culture of the time, a number of these things were thorny issues or controversies. And man, I remember reading over my break just last week in between sessions, read his article on the Sabbath. Whew, I mean, talk about fiery. And I'm about to preach on the Sabbath this coming Sunday. So I'll definitely pluck a few comments from Ryle on that. Maybe not go quite as far as Ryle does, certainly on this. But wow, I mean, talk about some powerful stuff in these collections of essays. And this one might equal Practical Religion as my favorite of his. So Ryle, these three books was able to get at the PCA's General Assembly for, I think it was about $50, which is a really good price because typically these run about 75 altogether. So it's kind of like you're buying two and getting one free. So pretty cool stuff. Secondly, another collection of works that I bought recently. I'll go through these a lot quicker. Some practical books on ministry help. and then we'll get more into some other general categories of theology. But got a couple good books on ministry help here, and I thought these would be helpful to maybe recommend to some of you that you might want to consider for your own library, or if you're an elder or you're someone who is active in the church in the sense of ruling or leading. These might be helpful for you. Variety of books here. This little catechism just came out with Gospel Reformation Network. I think it was earlier this year. I cannot remember if they published it last year or not. Let's see if they've got it on here. Nope, it's July 2022. So this little booklet, the New Reformation Catechism on Human Sexuality, it is, oh goodness, so helpful. So it's styled after the 1563 Heidelberg Catechism, and it's answering modern questions about human sexuality in that kind of same format of sin, grace, gratitude, and really, really helpful. I think it's about 30 pages long. Nope, even less than that. Nope, it's right at 30, 31. And it just engages the issues of human sexuality in a very faithful way. And I would put these on your in your lobby for people to pick up. I buy a couple hundred of these and give them away to people, because this is such an important gospel issue. Because to divert yourself from human sexuality the way God's designed it is to unravel the creation. So it is absolutely crucial to be clear on this issue, and I have found this very, very helpful. And if we have the money, I'd like to give our entire church a copy of this. And once I really review it thoroughly and get some of my own conclusions about it, instead of just read over it, but actually kind of thoroughly get some comments and thought, and then share it with our elders, and then maybe give this out to our church to help them navigate the dangerous waters of the culture in this era of human sexuality. Another book that was really fascinating is, if you're in church ministry, you're always going to get issues like this of legal stature, or just slander, or even just handling people's concerns. Where do you go with these things? And this lady, Teresa Lynn Sidebotham, has put together a helpful book on handling allegations. So in ministry, you're gonna run into this, and so the reality is you're gonna have to know, what's the process, where do I go with this, what's the next step with this. She offers you some good wisdom, as of course an attorney who does work in church work, especially employment law, to kind of give you some help and some helpfulness in this area of, where do I go with this concern, this allegation, this problem. Is this something that's credible? Is this something that's needed to take it to the next place? Is this something that, as a church pastor, I'm supposed to handle myself? Is just an internal spiritual matter? Is it something that goes higher than that to civil in the way that I'm supposed to handle this? So this will be a good kind of how-to guidebook for those of us that are in ministry. So Handling Allegations by Teresa Lynn Sidebotham, very good book there. Another handful of books that I picked up that I thought would be helpful for those of you that are thinking about ministry training is, very quickly, this little booklet called The Ruling Elder. That's fantastic. This booklet called The Challenge of Eldership. And lastly, an effective guide to elders meetings called Meetings that Work. And they're all different pieces of the same puzzle. Basically, if you got folks that get nominated to be ruling elders, well, here's a fantastic little guidebook. And the man's name is Leonard T. Van Horn, who could kind of help guide you through, if you're nominated, on, am I really ready to pursue this? It's a great little book. I read it in like 30 minutes. Yeah, it's a fantastic little book. The Challenge of Eldership, this is more of a guidebook for those who are actually elders. So this is talking through the normal challenges of being an elder and helping direct folks through. And this is by Donald McNair, and it's a little paper that he put together for the PCA denomination I'm in. It gives you a great workbook to kind of take folks through. And then lastly, if you're a teaching elder like me, or you are leading a group of men, directing your board, or your elders at your church, depending upon your denomination, this is a great book I've already started, called Meetings at Work. And this is trying to help you understand how the meeting itself is part of discipleship. The meeting itself is part of the gospel in the sense of its applications to the leadership in your church. That also gives you basically ministry manners. It talks through a number of things that are very helpful about not just the construction of the meeting, the purpose of the meeting, but the spirit of the meeting. It's very, very good. So really good little help there. And then lastly, three books for ministry-minded folks, or ministry tethered folks that are actually doing it every day. This is a great little book called Why Membership Matters, right? Maybe your church doesn't practice church membership, and I want to encourage you to strongly consider doing it. Actually considering membership and pursuing it. It's very important as a local church to be pursuing that. We're not free agents. We're bond servants. We're co-laborers of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's why Jesus says, take my yoke upon you, my burden upon you. He didn't say, well, let everyone else do the burden. You just kind of just watch, show up to church once in a while. No, he said, take my yoke upon you. It's easy and it's light compared to the condemnation and damnation of hell and the burdens of our sins, but it's still a burden. There's still work to be done. We're still sharing the burden in a very, minuscule way compared to Christ, but we're still sharing it. It's his burden. He's laying it upon us. We still have work to do. We do that as members. So Living Stones, the book is by a man named Peter Deesh, and it's called Why Membership Matters. So Why Church Membership Matters. Then also, this is a book I have just got last week that I'm excited about. It's called by Murray Capel, an Australian. I think he is. I think he's a. Yeah, I guess he is a Presbyterian. So Murray Capel, called the Elder-Led Church, and this is the model of ministry ultimately that Reformation churches often pursue. That it's not a one-man show. It's not just a handful of capable or charismatic folks, but there's also kind of an ordination process, a plurality process of leadership that's to be shared by officers that are men and called as ruling elders and teaching elders in the church. And it's elder-led overall. And this kind of goes through the process of what an eldership team looks like. It's remember a church I served at said that they had a youth ministry, and I remember saying, well, where is your youth ministry? And they pointed to a group of kids. And I said, that's not a youth ministry, that's a group of kids. Okay, let's let you think about that for a second. Just because you got kids doesn't mean you have a youth ministry. The same is true of leadership. Just because you got leaders doesn't mean you have a leadership or a team. Like, you have to work towards that. You have to work towards being a team. Just because you have people that are doesn't mean that they are that together. So I think this book will help me, continue to grow as an elder myself, grow as a leader of elders myself, and build a team. And lastly, another good book to help on leadership is Samuel Miller's collection of sermons here called Holding Fast the Faithful Word. And Samuel Miller was a church historian, church theologian from the Presbyterian Church from America. Not the PCA, wasn't born yet, but older iteration of it back in the day. And the Presbyterian Church then, was he was in the northern version of it. And Samuel Miller was a famous theologian from Princeton, and really a churchman, but he loved to preach. And he was worked at Princeton for a very, very long time. And he's known for his publications on church leadership, church history. He's got a great little book by Log Press called The History of Presbyterianism, which I really enjoyed. It's fascinating, very easy to read book, but very helpful, where he just tracks how this polity is the biblical option. Now, I know some of you might contend with that, and that's okay. But Samuel Miller is certainly unabashedly unashamed of his Presbyterian biblical position on church polity. But this is really good. I've already read his an article in here on pleading with God for a bigger ministry, and what he means by that is not church growth. What he means by that is disciple making. And amen to that. And so some really good stuff in here to encourage you if you're in the ministry on holding fast to the word of truth. So those are some good books on ministry. Now to some books on just general theology, a couple systematics here, and then some commentaries that I've gotten in this latest haul. And the first one that I'll show you from the theology group here, looks like there are 6. Okay, so sorry if you thought this video was over. We'll take about another 5 minutes here. But 6. First, I just got this book yesterday, so I don't have a whole lot to say about it right now, except for I got it, And this book is called God at Sinai, and it's by Jeffrey Niehaus. And I think this book is from an older series from Zondervan on biblical theology in the Old Testament. And I've been working my way through Exodus with our church, and we are actually almost through the first 20 chapters, and we'll finish those by the end of the summer. But it just really inspired me to think through the theophanies of Exodus, particularly Exodus 3, and then you have the theophany, of course, of Exodus 12 and the Passover, the the angel, and again, it's the angel of the Lord, and comes and kills the firstborn of Egypt, and really the firstborn of anyone who didn't have blood on the top and the sides of the doors. And also the theophany of the cloud by day, the pillar by night, and then the theophany of getting them through the Red Sea. And you see, and then of course the incredible theophany, almost the pyrotechnic theophany of Exodus 19. So it's just all these theophanies just made me think about this just reality of who God is. And the book popped up that seemed to help me, I think, here, called God at Sinai. So it's talking about covenant and theophany in the Bible, particularly with the backgrounds of the ancient Near East. So it's digging in scripturally, but it's also seeing kind of from the background of other writings too, to give to lend some context to the discussion of God at Sinai. Actually, even pursues post-Sinai theophany discussions in scriptures. You know, you think of the prophets, of course, and the Psalms and the history books, and then also even peeks into the New Testament a little bit as well. So might be a great book for you if you're very interested in theophany and Old Testament biblical theology there. So interesting book. A couple other books, very, very different, is Meredith Klein's book called Images of the Spirit. And this is kind of one of the most well-known of Meredith Klein's books, the other being Kingdom Prologue. And there's a few others that he's very, very well known for, like An Oath Consigned. And this book is talking about the image of the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament, and it's very, very important for his overall biblical theology. If you've read some of Kingdom Prologue, you've read his understanding of covenantal, the framework method of Genesis and these things. This is a very important element to his biblical theology. In fact, some of the scholars that love Klein say this is maybe one of his, if not his most important book, which is interesting. So just got this book about a month ago and haven't dipped into it yet, so I'm looking forward to this one. On the other side of what's conservative, to the more liberal side of theology, but I've always wanted to read through it because most scholars that do work in Christology always wrestle with what Isaac August Dorner, or sorry, yeah, Isaac August Dorner teaches in his teaching on the kenosis. Okay, and this is kind of he's a modern critical liberal scholar on divine immutability, but he's obviously reconsidering this idea, of course, the truth of God's unchangeableness. Now, again, we want to steer clear of what he concludes, but it's important to know the sources, and it's important to know who you're wrestling with and the interlocutors that you're wrestling with. And he kind of gives once he goes through the historical doctrine itself, he kind of gives a reconsideration, a reproposal, a new proposal towards the end of the book. And so he really wants to give kind of a sense of the kenosis, the emptying of self. And again, this is a position we cannot hold, but it's important to wrestle with those that disagree with us. So I'm looking forward to reading through his critique of the traditional classic Christian Orthodox position, and wrestling with his proposal, and coming up with my own counters to it as well. So that's called Divine Immutability by Isaac August Dorner. And then much more conservatively, these last three, David Clarkson's little book, Prizing Public Worship. Jonathan Landry Cruz, OPC pastor up in Michigan, has done a fantastic job writing a lot of books recently on public worship, on church membership. He's got a great book on called What Happens When We Worship. He's really focusing a lot on just on basically basic ecclesiology and Lord's Day worship, which is fantastic, of just kind of recovering the needs of focusing on these things and not just assuming that people get it. So he's put together three essays from the Puritan David Clarkson on prizing public worship above private worship, but not without private worship or Bible study or personal prayer, these things. And I've already read the first article in here, and whoo, I mean, it's based on the gates of Zion, and he goes through, David Clarkson goes through why God loves the gates of Zion more than any place else that he dwells. It focuses in on why he loves public worship more than just these other places of private worship, though he adores those too, which again, it shows the importance of the Lord's Day worship. So some really good stuff there from David Clarkson. I got this book, I think, for $3, so pretty cool. And then, oh man, this one's good. I just got this one last Thursday, and I read the opening part already, and I'm like, I'm gonna like this one. And it's by J.P. Fesco that he put out, I believe, last year. Let me see the date on this. Fesco, no, 2 years ago, 2022, called Arminius and the Reformed Tradition, Grace and the Doctrine of Salvation. So it's kind of engaging Arminius, and of course he is reformed, but he's deviant from the Orthodox Reformed position, which led to the Remonstrance movement that he kind of birthed. He wasn't part of it; he died before. But the Remonstrants that came after him, of course, were the ones that were resisted by the Synod of Dort, 1609, around that time period. And of course, that's where we get the 5 points of Calvinism. So, very, very controversial figure, J.B. Fesko, who is known as a systematic theologian, historical theologian of the Reformed faith, really dives into this issue of the medieval thought about if grace, whatever grace is in you, that's the grace you're supposed to work with. Kind of work with what you got is kind of the medieval slogan. And he says that Arminius kind of mixes that idea with the Reformed tradition, which is what leads him to such a synergistic idea. And that's kind of the thing he's trying to prove, that Arminius really does mix the medieval concept of grace with the Reformed tradition, which is why he comes out on the wrong end. So I'm looking forward to reading through this, and it's a short book, but it's one of those books that comes out of the Reformed Historical Theological Studies series that RHB, Reformation Heritage Books, does, and all the ones I have are just amazing. They're so good. Now they're very academic, but they're very helpful to tackle a particular issue of theology, especially scholastic kind of theology of the modern period in this kind of post-Reformation age. Some really good stuff. So J.B. Fesko's Arminius in the Reformed Tradition. And lastly, before I commend to you just a few commentaries I got, finally, the fourth volume of Dr. Beeke and Smalley's, Doctors Beeke and Smalley's Reformed Systematic Theology. This is volume 4. And as you see, it could hurt somebody. You know what I mean? Like, the thing's so big, it could hurt you. If you're not carrying it carefully, you could get injured carrying this thing around. So I think I opened up immediately when I got the book to the Day of Judgment and saw what he said about that, and I was like, well, this is fantastic. So I'm quickly becoming I've already always been a great Joel Beeke fan, but I'm quickly becoming sold on this 4-volume commentary being the most practically useful of systematics I own, because of it's modern, but the way that it's written is biblical, theological, historical, practical. So it kind of gets all the areas. It touches on all of them, where a lot of times systematics really only touch on a couple. And you can see how influenced Dr. Beeke's and Smalley have been by Peter Van Maastricht, because that's the same way he approaches it too. He approaches it biblical, theological, though alenctic, kind of apologetic, though they do too, but not quite as harshly as Maastricht does. So biblical, theological, alenctic, and practical. So you can see they kind of take from that Dutch Reformation orthodoxy piety tradition, which is, I always think, the most useful. It's very Puritanesque in that way, without just becoming laborious, what Puritans call branching, where they just go from one. There's another thing to talk about, another thing to talk about, another thing, and we all struggle with that when we're in love Puritans too. We get further into branches of it instead of just kind of staying the course and finishing the discussion. But this is really, really fantastic. The whole series, all 4 volumes, but very exciting to have the Church and Last Things in volume 4 by Beekes and Small, doctors there, professors as well. And I think this is probably the most helpful, useful, practical, and theologically faithful systematic theology out there that's up to date today. You might say, well, Ross, what are some of your other favorites? Well, for an more academic favorite, I would probably say Herman Bavinck for sure. Get the Wonderful Works of God 1 volume, or John Calvin's 1541 1-volume version of his Institutes of the Christian Religion. Those two are equally good, though they're not as long and thorough and not as practical, I would probably say. I would say Calvin's very devotional, and Bavinck's is very rich in its engagement with culture, its engagement apologetically with other ideologies and other isms out there. Very, very good. But this one's probably more thorough than that. But academically, probably Bavinck, the 4-volume Church Dogmatics. Charles Hodge, which is not really that hard, somewhere in the middle of a between a 1 and 10, it's like a 4, maybe a 5. Charles Hodge 3 volumes is absolutely dynamite, though it's heavily apologetic. I would probably say for 1 volume for easy reading, Louis Berkhof's one volume Systematic Theology, certainly the easiest and most introductory, I would probably say. And then just other than that, I would probably recommend, oh, trying to think what else would I recommend that are and then Maastricht, I think, for a good balance between academic and practical and pastoral. There's 7 volumes, but 4 have come out so far, and I certainly love his, probably almost more than anyone else's overall from yesteryear. So, all right, enough of that. So moving on finally to just some recommendations of what I got from my commentary series to you, and to say, hey, I bought these. You should buy these too. Okay. The first is just a one-off commentary I bought. I just say, hey, look, I got this. It's the Proverbs commentary from the Word Biblical Commentary series, Old Testament version there by Ronald Murphy. And what was so cool is I got this from a sister who sold it to me for $5. And I don't know what overcame her. Maybe the grace of God got a hold of her in such a way that she didn't know that that wasn't a fair price. But she sold it to me for $5. I mean, a book that's probably $30 used still in near perfect condition with just a little bit of shelf wear. A very academic. Let me just qualify that. So I used to own the entire New Testament, the green version, Word Biblical Commentary series, and I realized early in my seminary time, this is way too technical for where I'm at and for what I'm doing in ministry. I was doing youth ministry at the time. I'm reading like this, William Lane's, 2-volume, Hebrews Word Biblical Commentary on like the etymology of some word on baptism, and he's not helping me at all in ministry. So I just sold it off to this kind of fairly liberal guy in our seminary who eventually got kicked out of seminary for being too liberal. But he bought it from me, and I kind of regret it now in a little bit of ways, but I needed the money at the time. But now, slowly and surely, I'm buying them back. One $5 volume, order billing at a time. So I got this volume, which is kind of cool. And lastly, I didn't get it's not a steal, but it was certainly a deal. There's a difference between steals and deals in buying things. But I got, as you can see right here, 41 volumes of the 43. The 2 volumes I didn't get because I already own them. 41 volumes of the 43 volumes of the New American Commentary series. See right here, which I think is one of the best, if not the best, evangelical scholarly commentary that comes from a very faithful to the text commentary, and also some practical application as I go, though not segmented off. There's a lot of academic discussions in the book that are called excursuses and things like that. Still academic, but not and not practical. Okay, but offers up really good practical thought as they go through some really rich scholarship and some really rich exposition of the text. I have found that the 3 volumes I have used in my own study, Douglas Stewart's Exodus, Dwayne Garrett's Hosea, and Dwayne Garrett's Joel, have been incredible. I mean, they've been absolutely incredible. Probably my favorite commentaries I've ever read, apart from maybe Dr. Bruce's works in the New International Commentary, New Testament. So 2 volumes I want to recommend to you that I'm looking forward to looking through is first Daniel Block, the famous Old Testament scholar Daniel Block. I just got his book. This didn't even make it into the recommendation. I got his book on covenant that came out recently. Daniel Block's great book on covenant from the Old Testament there. Fantastic. But Daniel Block's book on Judges and Ruth looks just fantastic to me to go through. And then Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, of course, by Dwayne Garrett. OG, fantastic scholar. My doctor, professor in seminary in my Hebrew class and also in my Hebrew biblical backgrounds class, Dr. Eugene Merrill, he said he loved Dwayne Garrett. And so from that point on, I focused in on Dwayne Garrett. Also from the New Testament commentary series, looking forward to reading Tom Schreiner, of course, kind of an older book that he did, but Tom Schreiner's work on 1st and 2nd Peter and Jude. Of course, 2nd Peter and Jude go together. And then David Garland's well known for his commentaries on 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and this is his commentary on 2nd Corinthians in this series, and I'm really looking forward to that one. So I recommend any of these books to you, depending upon what your needs are, and that's a large book dump to you all, but I just wanted to highlight some things I've gotten in the last few months. Kind of working my way a little bit through a lot of these things, and we'll be using these for references and for ministry training for myself and for others. Hope you find some help in this. All right, signing off.